As we continue talking about Chapter 1, we're going to talk about the financial statements next. The financial statements are the standard reports that pretty much every company in America presents to support their financial position or to basically tell the story of what happened in the last year of their business. And again, if you look across all companies all across the US, public companies, private companies, anyone that's telling their story to someone outside of their business is using these four standard reports. The first standard report is called the income statement, and it's just out a statement of income. You can see an example on page 20 of your textbook, Exhibit 1.8. And you'll see when you look at that example that there's really two things that appear on the income statement: all of your revenues and all of your expenses. You can also see how important it is that we learn what the different categories are. On your exam, you're going to be asked to prepare an income statement, to prepare a statement of retained earnings, to prepare a balance sheet, all the three main financial statements. You'll be asked to prepare these. And so you need to know what the revenues and expenses are and what all these categories are to be able to do this. Also keep in mind, the income statement subtracts revenues minus expenses to come up with a number called net income. The next financial statement is called the statement of retained earnings. You can see an example of it on page 21. And it's essentially a roll forward or takes your old balance of retained earnings and then does some stuff to come up with your new balance of retained earnings. This will make more sense once you're through chapter 4. I feel like the financial statement puzzle, we kind of introduce it early and then you forget about it for a couple chapters. And then in chapter 4, you're like, oh yeah, that's right, this makes sense. Anyway, the beginning balance of retained earnings in your experience in these first couple chapters will typically be 0 because you'll be dealing with businesses that are just starting out. So you don't have any history. But what we'll do once we get the old balance, whether it's 0 or whatever, is we're going to add net income. Note that net income number is going to come from your income statement up above. You're going to subtract your dividends or your net loss if there's a net loss, which is not common, but you will do that if there's a net loss. You probably won't see a net loss at all in this class, but if there is one, you would subtract it also. The next financial statement is the balance sheet, which you can find on page 21 of your textbook and in Exhibit 110. The balance sheet is essentially, if you look at it, the accounting equation. It shows assets, and then it shows your liabilities plus your equity, and it shows that they balance. That's why it's called the balance sheet. One thing to note, the retained earnings from the retained earnings statement also appears on the balance sheet. So that's the only account that appears on in two financial statements. Your revenues and expenses and your dividends basically get put into retained earnings, and then retained earnings goes to the balance sheet. So those numbers are there. They're just in retained earnings. The fourth financial statement we can see on page 23 is the statement of cash flows. We really aren't going to talk about this much early in this class. There's a whole chapter 14 is all about the statement of cash flows, but really you won't see or anything about the cash flow statement until then. But really all it is just a statement that shows all the cash transactions for the business. Now, one thing that I hear a lot when I tell people what I do for a living or when I talk to students is I hear people say, oh, I hate accounting, I hate math, or I'm not good at math. And that's the perception that students have, that this is a math class. And it's not really. It's really a rules class more than anything else. And what you'll find as we go through chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4 is that we're just going to learn more accounting rules. There's a name for these rules. The name of the rules is GAAP. That stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. And this is short for what the accounting rules are. The FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, it's their job to kind of establish what the rules are. Again, most of the rules in accounting, most of the rules in your textbook, most of the rules that we go through in this class were generally accepted because they've been done this way for hundreds of years. And so there's nobody needed to kind of sit down and decide what these rules are, because it's just how we've been doing accounting for all these hundreds of years. But when new things come up or there's questions or disagreements in the accounting industry, the FASB is kind of like the Supreme Court of accountants. They're the ones that kind of adjudicate and do all the research and decide on how, at least in America, these things are going to be dealt with. Worksheet 2 is next for you. Worksheet 2 is the same accounts you saw in Worksheet 1, only now we're asking you to tell us which financial statement the accounts appear on. So I would recommend you try to do it without using Worksheet 1, just to see if you know the categories, assets, liabilities, equity. But if you need to refer to Worksheet 1, certainly that can help you complete worksheet to.